Hi there. I'm Indira Samarasekara.
And I am Martha Piper, and we're so glad you are joining us today for our podcast, She's Got Nerve.
This podcast is based on our book, Nerve, which we wrote several years ago to assist women who are leaders or who are aspiring to lead. We wanted to expand our focus on women leaders by interviewing extraordinary women and recording their unique and authentic personal stories about how they developed the nerve to become leaders in their respective environments. Building on our own experiences we wrote about in our book, Nerve, we believe these stories will demonstrate how nerve is required to overcome many of the obstacles women leaders face.
You know, Indira, lots of people ask us how we landed on the idea of nerve. Why nerve? What we, I think, discovered as we looked upon our own experiences is that nerve is the personal attribute that is often missing in women, even in those who aspire to lead. You know, nerve to be true to yourself, nerve to take a path less traveled, nerve to go first, nerve to act decisively, nerve to redefine yourself. And so often, yet, the term nerve is used pejoratively when applied to women, such as, the nerve of her, or she's got a lot of nerve. Our goal in this podcast is to slay this dragon, to turn it on its head, to describe nerve as a trait that is required to lead rather than an attribute that women are not entitled to exhibit.
So let's get right to it. What a treat it is today to have a conversation with Melanie Woodin, an internationally recognized neuroscientist who studies the mechanisms underlying learning and memory in the brain. Melanie has recently been named the University of Toronto's 17th president, the first woman to assume this position. Prior to this appointment, she was Dean of the university's Faculty of Arts and Science, Canada's largest and most comprehensive faculty. She completed her Bachelor of Science degree in Biology and Master of Science degree in Zoology at the U of T and obtained her PhD in neuroscience at the University of Calgary. Following postdoctoral study at Berkeley, she joined the U of T as an assistant professor in 2004 and has spent her entire academic career at that university. Now, typically, we have interviewed women who have either completed their leadership roles or in their final years of their respective assignments. Today, we are very pleased and excited to be interviewing a remarkable woman who is just beginning her term as president, who is embarking on her journey rather than completing the role. We are so interested in hearing from Melanie, her perspective as she takes on this new role, what she's feeling, learning, and experiencing in the first few weeks of her presidency. So let's get started.
Hi, Melanie. It's so great to have you with us today. It's wonderful to be able to connect with you, to hear your stories, and learn more about what you are currently experiencing. Now, having assumed just recently your role, I think on July 1, as president of the University of Toronto, could you share with us what the last few months following the announcement of your appointment in March until you're actually taking up the helm in July, what's that been like? And have you experienced any surprises?
Well, thank you so much for that, Martha. But first, let me say how honored I am to be on your podcast. As you'll know, and as you've talked about before, I believe on the show, there aren't that many female leaders in higher education in Canada. And the two of you are so inspiring to so many of us. So when your book first came out, I had it hot off the presses and have devoured it and gone back to it many times. Having heard from both of you after the announcement came out to offer congratulations and then invite me here was an incredible honor. So thank you for that. As to your question about what the time has been like since the announcement until I started in July 1, let me just back up a little bit and say that, there was this period when I knew that I had the role, but the announcement hadn't yet come out. And I had thought that, when I was getting close to the acceptance part, that, once I knew that I had the role, I would be so excited, and this would be the start of this wonderful journey. And in fact, I was really unexpectedly very nervous after I had found out and before the announcement came. And I said it was unexpected. I don't, all of us get nervous about various things, but it's not something that I've struggled with a lot. And I was so excited that I'd been offered the role. So why was I so nervous? And in reflection, there was good reason for that, as you'll know, and probably many of the listeners. Right. Well, it's not official actually until your governing council or your equivalent body um, takes that final decision. At that time when my announcement came, the meeting happened in the morning, and then I was invited in to essentially be congratulated on the role and make some remarks. So I think there was good reason that I was feeling nervous, because in fact I didn't have the role until that governing council meeting. And when I came into the governing council chambers, which really was the start of the announcement, seeing so many close colleagues and friends, people that I've come to know, that I've worked with so closely over the last 20 years, and are members of governing council that dedicate so much to the institution, giving a round of applause and a standing ovation. And I was then overwhelmed with this positive, excited feeling, where I actually felt, for the first time since I heard the good news about the role, some level of feeling at peace. So people said, "You must have been so nervous going up to make the remarks." In fact, that's when the nerves started to really come down, and I really felt like this was happening, and I was very excited about it. So I was able to share my first remarks with the U of T community more broadly in those governing council chambers. And just since then, this overwhelming feeling of excitement, positivity, enthusiasm, I think that has come from the energy that I've received from the community. So I've experienced nothing but an outpouring of excitement about me taking the role, people wanting to understand how they could be part of it and what's coming. And that has just continued to energize me. And I have remarked, of course, as well, that since the announcement in July 1, there were a lot of parties, a lot of receptions and parties. And so I started to tell people, turns out this role isn't maybe as difficult as I thought. If I could just continue to go to these positive receptions and, people were excited, I just keep this going for 5 years, maybe I can do this job. So that was the period leading up to July.
It's so interesting to hear your story and your experience, because both Indira and I would say 80 to 90% of new appointees to presidencies of the universities here in Canada are not known by the community.
Right.
We come in as an external, somewhat unknown, this kind of weird relationship that you're both excited, but you're fearful because you aren't known, and you have to demonstrate something, that an expectation. I remember my mother was so excited, and she would tell everyone. And I remember she called me one day and said, "Oh, I'm so excited." I said, "Mom, it's great, but now I have to do the job." And I've experienced, and Indira, please jump in, I experienced this mix of excitement and optimism and all of that, but an enormous fear, because I was going into an environment
Right.
I didn't know. And I think that is a difference. Indira, what was your experience?
So my experience was slightly different. As you know, I was very lukewarm initially about moving to Alberta. The problem, Melanie, is everybody in British Columbia thinks that somehow Edmonton is in, at the far end of the North Pole, and all kinds of negative perceptions of Alberta float around British Columbia, all of which are dead wrong and extremely unhelpful. So, it took me a while to be convinced, and I won't go through the details, but I said to Jim Edwards, who had been the chair of the board, who had done his darndest to make me change my mind, by the time I applied for the job, I was so excited. And I said to him, if I throw my hat in the ring, I will only do so when I am so convinced that I want this job and that I'm excited about it. And that's exactly what happened. It took me a while to get there. But once I got there, I was very excited. But like Martha, I mean, there was fear, right? I knew my materials engineering colleagues at U of A extremely well. Thankfully, that was really helpful. But I didn't know anyone else. And Carl Amrine, who was Dean of Arts and Science at U of T, was provost at the time. I didn't know him at all. So, yeah, but enjoy. Let me tell you, it is the best time ever. The first, and may it last 5 years because you're going to need all that energy and the goodwill, which I think it's clear you've engendered that. And that bodes well for you.
Let me be clear that I am being comical when I say that it's going to last 5 years. Having been a Dean of Arts and Science for almost 6 years, I full well know that was a honeymoon period, and reality is quickly upon us. To your point, why not, to some extent, fill your tank with all the positivity when you can, so that you can dip in there when you need it, when the times are going to be more challenging, as they will.
Let me also say, and Martha can pitch in very quickly, having done the job for 10 years, I would say the memory I now have is that it was one of the most important and exciting decisions I made career-wise, and I had an incredible time, notwithstanding the challenges which you read about in the book. So it is an incredible journey, one of the most challenging and wonderful jobs one could ever have. So Martha and I are fascinated with how women get to where they are. What inspires them to make the career decisions they make? And what factors influence their ability to lead? So I read that your decision to become a scientist happened overnight. From what I understand, it was your summer trip near the northern shores of Georgian Bay during your teenage years that inspired you. You were exposed to biologists who were collecting water samples from a stream, and they told you they were graduate student scientists conducting fieldwork. You were quoted as saying, "It was at that point that I knew I wanted to be a scientist." Amazing. One experience inspired you to become a scientist. Your stories resembles many of the stories of women we have interviewed to date. A childhood experience unleashed a passion for a specific area of study. What we're now interested in knowing is whether your decision to become an academic administrator, a leader, was likewise inspired by a specific interaction or experience. And can you share with us how you decided to take on that role, whether you attribute it to an individual interaction? Do you remember consciously telling yourself that you wanted to be a leader?
Sure, happy to share that. Let me just go back and add one thing briefly to the anecdote about being in Georgian Bay and coming across these graduate students. So it had been for some time that I was passionate about science and knew I wanted to pursue something in the sciences. And I didn't know where scientists work. I think that's not uncommon, right? You might know that somebody had a biology degree and then they became a teacher or they became a medical doctor. I enjoyed doing the scientific labs in my high school, but I didn't know where people did those experiments after they went to university. So it was more that on that trip when I came across these what I realized later were graduate students doing some field work, and they told me they were from the University of Toronto and they were doing these experiments. I thought, oh, okay, well, I guess if you go to the University of Toronto, you could be a scientist like them. And in fact, I then signed up for courses in ecology and evolutionary biology because it seemed most similar to what I had seen those graduate students doing. When, of course, I came and I enjoyed those courses, but then I became fascinated with all other types of science as well. So it was really just seeing someone who, and these were, graduate students, scientists in the making, but that was enough for me to know that you could pursue a career in that direction. So now coming a little bit to leadership. So no, I think like many academics who have their first position as an assistant professor, academic leadership is furthest from your mind. I don't think I even ever considered the chair or the dean or the president I mean, I suppose I knew they were academics, but I don't think I ever gave it any thought. I never, and it was just not part of my consciousness. And I think because, of course, you're starting your first faculty position, you are so entirely focused on the pressing needs, right? In my case, getting my research lab going, applying for funding, but getting graduate students, getting ready to teach my first courses, really wanting to ensure that I was engaging students and doing it in a way that the university, was leaning into around pedagogical innovation. So I was all consumed by those aspects of the role. It was also raising young children. So and you're thinking about getting tenure. I mean, at the first few years, that is really, I think, one of your single objectives. What came after that, I don't think I gave a lot of thought to because I was so focused. Now, having said that, when you ask about how did this all get started with leadership, I do think back to, and some of my colleagues have remarked on, fairly early on, maybe it was in that first year, I was going to one of our departmental seminar series. It was called PhysioFest. It was the physiology weekly seminar series. And I think after going 2 or 3 times, I thought, well, we could be doing a lot more with this, Why aren't graduate students also, doing a mini lecture once per year? And why don't they have a pizza lunch with the speaker after? And whatever, why don't we do a joint one with this department or whatever else I came up with? I can't even remember now. After one of the seminars, I said to all the faculty members in our group, why don't we stay here and talk about what we might do? Now, of course, by the end of that meeting, I had been appointed the new leader of the PhysioFest seminar series. So naive I was to make a suggestion about how to improve something. And sure enough, I had this role. And of course, it was a great way to begin service, right? I mean, service to your department is, of course, important also when you begin. I think if you put your hand up and suggest that you're going to do something, I'm sure most people in the department had their eyes on me like, okay, great, check mark that, you ask her to do something and she's probably going to say yes. So I did start to get that experience early on. Where I think I really started to think about it seriously is when I started to be contacted for much more senior roles. And I realized that those were going to be opportunities that I would at least have the opportunity to pursue. And so I better do some really deep thinking about the trajectory that I wanted for my career. And being so active with my research program, I know all scholars, any discipline face this, right? If you're going to spend more time on leadership, you inherently won't have all of that time in your own scholarship. And yes, you can find ways to maintain a very active program, but as you really progress with leadership, at some point, you're going to have to make some decisions. And so I really thought about impact, right? Where can I have the most impact? So I thought about the impact I was having as a professor in my department, and that's running my research lab and teaching students. So then I thought about that compared to the impact, for example, I could have if I were to take on the role of the Dean of Arts and Science. This is when I first really thought deeply about it. And then I thought about the impact that I might be able to have, for example, setting the research direction, the research impact of 1,000 faculty members. Right? And what were, for example, the programs that we might put in place that would allow each one of them to reach a higher level of scholarship. And that impact inherently was going to be more than the impact that I would be having in my own program. Once I worked through that thought process that I wanted to have the most impact I could in my career, then I was certainly positively inclined to pursue leadership roles.
It's so interesting, Melanie, that you use the word impact. It really brought to my mind my own experience when I just finished my PhD at McGill in epidemiology, and I thought I wanted to be, I was going to solve every epidemic, I was going to be an epidemiologist. And it just so happened, unlike most situations, I'm a brand new scholar and I'm approached to be the head of the School of Physical and Occupational Therapy at McGill. They were looking for a therapist who had their PhD. I was the warm body in the country, right?
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, there is no way I want to do this job. And I went to my PhD advisor, and he said to me, impact. You can sit there and do everything you like in epidemiology and write the most important journal articles, but you're probably going to move the field very little. But if you take on this role as leader of a school and try to change the way the profession is taught and practiced and bring research into it, you will have huge impact.
Mhm.
That discussion was key in my decision. And so I'm so intrigued with you, how you got to that. And your story is so typical of the women that we have interviewed. I think very few of us ever grew up thinking we're going to lead, versus men who I think often aspire to lead, which leads me to my next question, which is there's been a lot of excitement around the fact that you are the first woman to be the president of the University of Toronto. Now, being the first is always challenging and brings with it certain expectations for performance and increased scrutiny of personal attributes. And while it is now becoming more common for universities to name women as their leaders, and we've seen that happening, the U of T is not just any university. It is one of the finest in the world, and let's be clear, it's number one in this country. So it brings even more attention and media interest. So my question is, how do you view this situation? Do you think there are different expectations for you as the first woman to lead the University of Toronto than if you were a man? And if you were a man, reminds me of Taylor Swift's song. Now, I have to admit, I'm a bit of a Swiftie, and her song is If I Was a Man. And there's a line here. It says, I'm so sick of running as fast as I can, wondering if I'd get there quicker if I was a man. Okay? That song, I think, is one of her best songs because she captures this issue of, yes, we're making progress, but we do it differently and there are different expectations. So how are you dealing with these expectations and this increased attention? And do you think you will lead differently than if you were a man?
So many great questions in there, Martha. Let me start by saying that my daughter is going to be thrilled that you're talking about Taylor Swift. She's a major Swiftie, and you might know that she announced last night she's dropping a new album.
Exactly.
So the excitement in our household this morning was just through the roof. First off, it's such an incredible honor to be named the 17th president of the U of T. Now add to that I'm the first female in our long history, 198 years, right? We're about to embark on our third century. So the honor is only elevated further. So it is a historic milestone for the institution and probably for more broadly. And that's not lost on me. Representation matters. Full stop. It's important. I am deeply humbled and honored, and I know how important this representation is for so many. So I do feel that adds at times an additional weight to some extent, but one that I'm pleased to carry. I would say that, and as I said in response to one of my earlier questions, the energy and the excitement that I've received across the broad U of T community and beyond, the city, the country, and my colleagues around the world who've shared their excitement with me about me being the first female leader of the university. I am so thrilled people are excited about it. This is an important milestone. And of course, most importantly, I hope that this inspires other women to take on their own leadership roles. And I've already had many conversations with women about it that have reached out, might be ad hoc or more formally to say, I was sort of wondering myself if I should explore this or take on an opportunity. And often it's been someone to say, you know what? You did it, and I think that I'm going to give it a try too. So you see how important that is, and I'm so pleased that that's another impact that I'm having on others. After the decision had been made that I would take that role, and before the announcement, I was collectively working with colleagues here about the announcement. We were considering whether we would emphasize the fact that I was the first woman to hold the role. And in the end, we made the decision not to, in large part because we knew it would be pretty obvious. And we did expect that media would highlight that. And that's exactly what happened. And that was wonderful, right? The Globe and Mail ran a story about U of T appointing the first female leader. And so we're thrilled that there's excitement about that. To speak a little bit to your question about expectations and whether people have elevated or different expectations, yeah, I think there's a wide array of expectations, whether you're gendered or not, whether some of those expectations are elevated because I'm the first female. Probably. We have a big community. I wouldn't necessarily expect otherwise, but that's not something that I dwell on at all. I'm going to lead in the way that I feel is best for this institution.
You also are an internal appointment, and you've spent your academic career at U of T and various positions, and as you pointed out, obviously well known in the community, not only for your skills and accomplishments, but probably also for some decisions you've made. And not all of them would have been plain sailing. I'm sure some of them were viewed as controversial. So it's interesting. U of T has traditionally made internal presidential appointments. And research universities, of course, are notorious for appointing external presidents, like the two of us were. So some suggest that this is because the internal candidates are too well known. You have a track record, not always being seen as positive. And external candidates are unknown and so easier to sell because nobody knows about any controversial decisions or their impact. So could you comment on this phenomenon? And what do you see the advantages of being an internal appointment? And what are the disadvantages? And what advice would you give to people who seek to lead as an internal candidate?
Yeah, great questions. I'm sure that both of you recognize there's merits to both internal and external candidates, right? Both for the university receiving them and for the candidate coming in, right? And often it really, the right choice depends upon where the institution or the organization is at that point and what they need. The phenomenon that you talked about, though, is certainly one that I've had a lot of experience with. For my time as Dean of Arts and Science, I chaired, a dozen or more search committees a year for academic leaders, mostly department chairs. It would not be uncommon that at the beginning of the search process, where you'd be hearing from members of the search committee sort of about the state of the department at the time, challenges, opportunities, what we might want to look for. That's how we always start to understand where it's at. People are usually pretty forthcoming, and they're telling you what the challenges are and all the things that need to be done and these opportunities and the list of the work that would need to be done for any incoming leader is only growing. And then they come to the conclusion that the only person that could do this is somebody external, and that there's some magical person out there that can come in and bridge divides between members of a department and solve longstanding inequities and how we distribute resources and whatever else it might be, right? That there's these magical people out there. And sure, often there are people internally that have those skills and experience too. But to your point, are sometimes seen as perhaps at a faculty meeting that we're seen as being on one side of a debate or another. And so I'm always trying to remind people that when you haven't been in a leadership role before, right, you're going to engage in a different way than when you assume leadership role. So in terms of how I'm thinking about coming in as an internal, which I think in general, maybe the question was geared towards, I'm deeply grateful that I am an internal. First of all, the University of Toronto is complex. Many people will know that. We are a very large institution spread across 3 campuses. We've recently crossed the 100,000 student mark. We have vast undergraduate programs, graduate programs, professional programs, partnerships, etc. So coming in with some knowledge of how the university operates, it is an asset, I think, to at least getting started in that first year, because you've got some understanding of how things operate. But I don't think it's the biggest asset. I mean, such as both of you did. If you're an experienced leader and you come in, you got a great team, people are going to get you up to speed quickly. You can learn that. I would say a strong asset that I'm grateful to have is the trusted relationships that I've built up over many years with people across the institution. Because universities operate on collegial governance, all right, and having, whether it's formal governance or informal, right, it's really having the community get behind you when you make a decision and want to support you in moving that forward. And there are, of course, times when there is a contentious decision to be made. And ultimately, when you make a decision to go in one particular direction, there are going to be people that are not that wish that hadn't been the outcome. But when you've built up trusted relationships that people can say, okay, maybe that's not the decision that I was hoping for, but look, I've gained trust in this person as a leader over the last 5+ years, so I'm going to get on board here and support this and moving forward.
Melanie, what you have articulated about I think the impact of internal appointments is well known in the corporate world.
Mm-hmm.
It is rare. It is totally rare for a corporate organization to go external for an appointment of their CEO. And I remember serving on one board where we knew the CEO was stepping down, and we began to think about succession. First of all, they do succession planning beyond belief. They cultivate their own. They ensure there is somebody ready in the event that a new CEO is needed overnight. And I remember sitting on the HR committee of one corporation where we knew the CEO was leaving, and I made this crazy recommendation. Aren't we going to look at an external search to be sure we, know that everyone out there has been given a chance? They looked at me like I was crazy. They said, if we go external, our share price is going to drop 30% overnight. Wow. Because it signals that we are a troubled institution,
Right.
And we have not done our job in preparing our own to move forward. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that.
Mm-hmm.
I think universities can learn. And I've watched the U of T with great respect and admiration for the fact that almost, I think, with the exception of one which we all are aware of, you have gone internally consistently. And look where you stand as a university. So I think there is something to it. So moving along, as Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, you advocated for and implemented many DEI initiatives, diversity, equity, inclusion. Specifically, you were committed to not only ensuring there was a deep pool of candidates for faculty positions, but also you took steps to address what you saw as the cumulative inequalities that might narrow the candidate pool and present barriers specifically to women. Now, one of your first acts as dean was to expand the portfolio of vice dean, faculty and academic life, to include equity. Now, I'm interested now, given what we see south of the border in terms of dismantling DEI programs and administrative units, and to a lesser extent, but still clearly there within Canada, some pushback on these initiatives, what your current perspective is on DEI, how a university such as U of T should proceed given the climate, and whether you have changed course with regard to this priority or whether you see new opportunities to pursue it in the current climate.
Great question. Let me just start by stating unequivocally that the University of Toronto and I, as its leader, are deeply committed to what we call inclusive excellence. Okay, so inclusive excellence is really a framework that we use that integrates DEI into every aspect of our organization. So going beyond simply increasing diversity, we're emphasizing and deeply working to create an environment where all individuals are valued, respected, and empowered to thrive. We deeply believe that this approach we've taken around inclusive excellence has been critical to us being a leading global research institution, and that we would not have the same standing in research excellence if we had not deeply embedded inclusion in every aspect of what we do. And there's lots of great literature that explains why, right? Why does this work? Well, expounding the boundaries of knowledge require the widest range of experiences and perspective. Attracting the top talent across the spectrum requires the highest standards of scholarship. So while we are an elite institution with respect to excellence, and excellence always leads at U of T, we achieve that because we are inclusive at every level, social and economic diversity of students, staff, and faculty. So we really feel like both on the DEI side and the academic excellence side, we understand these are two sides of the same coin, and we deeply understand them. When we fulfill both of them, we are the better for it. So, yes, there is a changing external climate. We know here at the university that we are thriving because we have embraced inclusive excellence. So we will not be wavering on that point. And let me just add a couple of anecdotes that have really resonated with me recently. You may know that one of our alumni is Malcolm Gladwell, and he, in a recent podcast talking about his most recent book, shared with a podcaster that, the U.S. elite institutions, they distinguish themselves on how many students they keep out, right? The limited acceptance they have. Whereas his alma mater, the University of Toronto, prides itself on how many we accept, right? We want everyone here, and I want every Canadian, and of course globally, but every Canadian to see the University of Toronto that is a place that is here for them and their family. So we are highly inclusive in that regard. And one other anecdote that's been in my mind a lot recently, we recently had an honorary degree ceremony in our last convocation period, and at a lunch we had following, the honorary degree recipient was talking about his experience and coming to U of T, and he'd had a privileged upbringing in the Toronto community. And but he'd gotten to know someone in his incoming year who had the exact opposite experience growing up in Toronto. And he said what always stuck with him is that the U of T is here whether you had all the breaks in life or absolutely none of them. The U of T was here for you. And that was about students, but I like to think that that's the same for faculty and for staff too, right? The U of T is here for everyone, whether you had all the breaks or absolutely none of them. And that because of that, because we embrace that, we're going to be the better for it in our mission of excellence in teaching and research.
Well said, Melanie. Well said. Honestly,
Thank you.
I wish more people heard that, because there is this fear that the backlash is going to drive any notion of encouraging people of vastly different backgrounds to thrive will actually be excluded. The other thing that I loved about your comment, and that is the business of your success is not whom you exclude, but the fact that so many people are included. And I think, that is a very important if you will, sentiment. And I think Canadian universities who are not quite enjoying the funding from governments need to get that message out in order to get more public support, I think. So, well said and well done. And I think it's going to be really crucial for Canadians to feel that they can aspire to go to a top university in the world right here and will find a place for themselves and will be included. I wanted to comment on your acceptance speech to the faculty where you said, I ask you to join me in dreaming big. Dreaming big. Wow. That's in a time like that, that's a pretty bold call. And I recognize that I'm talking about leading with ambition at a time when the world is in turmoil, marked by deep, what I call dark divisions and political conflict and looming existential crisis. So at a time when academic freedom is under threat And when funding is so constrained, some would look at this set of circumstances and say, the sky is falling, a claim that the task at hand is impossible, and the world is coming to an end. And instead, you step out and you ask your colleagues to dream big. Wow, that takes a reservoir of positivity. So can you share where you find the strength to make that call, to call people to dream big in these tough times? And what do you mean when you say dream big?
Sure. Great question. And I will be having my installation in October. We'll be sharing a lot more broadly about what dreaming big looks like. But it's really coming from two vantage points. One is that we've got a big historic milestone coming up here at U of T. In 2027, we're going to celebrate our bicentennial, 200 years that the University of Toronto has operated. And that means that we're launching into our third century. So another reason I'm feeling deeply honored to be the 17th president of the University of Toronto is I get to lead us into our third century, right? And that's where the opportunity comes from, in large part, to dream big, right? To reflect on what we've accomplished in 200 years and to think about what we might do in the next 100. Now, I'm not suggesting that I'm going to have a strategic plan for the next 100 years. I've got a 5-year term. But I think we need to set our sights very high for where we want to go in this third century. And that's what I'm trying to suggest we think about. And that relates to the second vantage point, and these are the dark divisions, the deep turmoil that I referenced there, right? We've got funding challenges, we have geopolitical tensions that play out on our campus. This is a difficult time. There's no doubt about that. But when there are difficult times, this is the time that universities need to step up and lead, right? And to demonstrate the role of higher education in solving these challenges. So let me give you just a few examples. Maybe I'll start with some of the existential crises, right? There's two that we think a lot here about at the University of Toronto right now. One is climate change, and the other is artificial intelligence. Well, on the climate change front, a number of years ago, under my predecessor's leadership, we as an institution made the decision to become a climate-positive campus. And that was a pretty bold, dream big decision, right? To say, look, by 2050, we're going to have reduced our carbon emissions to the point, right, where we're benefiting the environment. How are we going to get there? And the decision was and there was a lot of planning went into it, but a big part of it was to say, look, we've got this large community, 3 campuses, 100,000 students, thousands of faculty and staff. Why don't we use our community as a living lab, right? Why don't we ask every member of our community, students, staff, and faculty, to bring the best ideas forward, whether they're technical innovations or change management or economics, about what we can do to transform our operations and our community to reach this lofty objective of being climate positive. And you wouldn't believe what people came forward with, right? Well, we had a landscaping project we were planning on our front campus, and an engineer said, why don't you put in a geothermal exchange unit there? Well, great news. Now we have North America's largest urban geothermal exchange unit, which moved up the deadline to be climate positive. Students came forward with great ideas, and there's many I could list. But what that showed us was, look, we can demonstrate, we can be a demonstration campus here for government, for communities, for organizations, about how we can turn the tide on some of these looming existential threats. You'll probably know, and many of your listeners will know, that University of Toronto is home really to the birthplace of artificial intelligence. And we were thrilled to celebrate last year Professor Geoffrey Hinton's winning of the Nobel Prize. And what Canadians know about Geoff Hinton is not only did he make the groundbreaking discoveries to produce artificial intelligence, but that he also went out very publicly a couple of years ago to raise his concerns about the existential threats of artificial intelligence. So we're now not going to just be the history of AI. We are going to be the future of artificial intelligence. the responsible adoption of AI for the betterment of humanity. We can think about how we transformed our organization to be climate positive. Let's do the same thing with artificial intelligence. Let's push the boundaries of this new technology in a way that benefits our country and people worldwide. So those are a couple of examples of dreaming big for sure. But I should also add, and anyone who knows me will add, I am an eternal optimist. I always see the glass half full. So dreaming big is really easy for me. I know that we've got a lot of work to do to get there.
Yeah. Well, I love the concept. I think
Yes.
it's a great tagline. I think it inspires. I think it makes people think differently about the future.
Yeah.
And that's always the challenge, is to move these institutions. You say you're entering your third century. That's a positive and a negative. You've had 200 years of doing things a certain way, and you're trying to move it to think about doing it a different way, or to doing it bigger, or to do it, even better. And that, I think, is always been the challenge of staid institutions, and particularly universities. Can't think of a better tagline. So well done. I can't wait to hear your installation address.
Let me just add, I was the president when U of A celebrated its 100 years. Honestly, it is a gift. And
yes,
I'm glad you're seeing
is.
it that way. It really enabled us to think big about doing some things for that 100th year that would create that momentum. So I'm thrilled to hear that, you're seeing it that way, because I think it's, as you know, very rarely does an institution turn 100 or 200 or 300. So good on you.
So, Melanie, in closing, we all cheer your appointment. We really do. As the first woman to assume the helm of the University of Toronto, and just cheer your appointment as the 17th president, regardless of gender. It's a wonderful, wonderful opportunity for the country, and we're really all applauding your achievement. It's certainly an accomplishment worth celebrating by both men and women. Well done. But as Michelle Obama once said, you may be the first, but be sure you are not the last. What do you see as your responsibility as a woman trailblazer to ensure that other women follow you as leaders?
Well, I mean, it is a huge responsibility. There's no doubt. As I said, it's a responsibility to be 17th president. And you add in this, as we sort of talked about, the really additional expectations people have as the first female lead, and how others who are considering taking up leadership will feel. But look, this is an added responsibility I am pleased to shoulder, because I am so excited about the prospect of this inspiring other women in whatever field that they have. Perhaps I'm still in the honeymoon phase and a bit naive here, but I'm going to do my best to lead this university to even greater heights as we dream big. And I hope by doing this, that additional responsibility of being the first female lead will only be really a positive for others.
Wonderful. We really admire you for taking on this role. And the role you've played in advancing women in the academia at so many levels is also truly remarkable. And just like you said, I am absolutely confident that your stories will serve as an inspirational example for thousands of women.
Yeah, so Melanie, we all kind of stand with you and take pride in your accomplishments and wish you only the best, and know that you will excel, because it's clearly you've excelled in the past, and the past always predicts the future. So, it's been a pleasure and a privilege being able to connect with you so early in your term. We'll come back maybe 5 years. Well, we won't be doing this podcast in 5 years, but someone
maybe we'll
may
have
come
lunch
back
in 5 years.
Yeah,
Martha will fly to
or maybe
Toronto.
before then. But
I don't even want to push that. But but it's been absolutely wonderful being able to share with you and hearing your authentic voice. So thank you so much for giving of your valuable time. We know all the pressures you're experiencing to join us today in our podcast.
Well, thank you both so much for having me on. It's a true honor, and thank you so much for your kind words. Greatly appreciated. Take care.
That was amazing. What an incredible choice that they've made. She's just seems to have got, in my opinion, just the right mix of leadership attributes. I thought it takes courage. Her advice on dreaming big in such a dark time, that has got to be totally courageous, because you run the risk of being kind of painted as a bit of a Pollyanna, but yet she was very convincing in why she thought it was appropriate to dream big. You know, the 200 years, the climate change, the AI, the, turmoil. No, I was just very impressed with her, just her approach. So I think it's good advice for leaders who are taking on leadership positions in this difficult time, to almost overcompensate by raising the bar in expectations, than saying, well, this is a difficult time, so we can't, we can only quote according to our cloth because we have so little. So anyway, that's what I got from her interview.
I couldn't agree more. I was taken with the dream big phenomena, and I think, she's going to have to work at it in
Yeah.
terms of defining what that means, but she seems to have a pretty good, feel about it. And
Right.
like you, I was impressed with all of the qualities she brings to this position. It was quite remarkable to hear her voice, and I loved her definition of inclusive excellence.
Yes.
I guess I think, it still will be a challenge to sell that, and to sell it in a way that she believes in, and I think we both believe in. But I think she's got her arms around it, and I think that a lot of us could learn from that terminology and her definition and her aspirations around excellence.
So in closing, we want to thank you again for listening to this episode of She's Got Nerve. If you enjoyed tuning in, then please leave us a review and share this conversation with your friends.
Go to www.nerve2021.com or follow our social channels at Nervebook 2021 to find out more about women in leadership and to access some useful resources.
And if there are any specific topics you would like us to cover in the future, then please email nervebook2021@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you.
A very special thanks to our team, marketing manager and producer Orla Mackerline and show manager Eilish Courtney.